Okay, we didn't quite catch it all there. But I know it well. Um, Grace, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, stop and think about this. Third and fourth graders, sometimes we can be really hard on each other, hey? And how did these kids know the story, huh, of their classmate, except their parents knew that story? It's really interesting as I look at this story overall, the role that potentially the role parents played and the role that this 13-year-old girl played. By the time Vanessa would have been in like third or fourth grade, she could have been like maybe 10, maybe or 11, depending on when she was able to start school, which would have meant that then Grace would have been 23 or 24 years old. I don't know if Grace has gotten married, but I know a lot of people Grace's age, 13-year-old girls, were violated, they were raped during the genocide, they became pregnant. And when I stop and think about the possible implications of this story and what it was that Grace carried with her in raising this child, I love that, she just honestly said, yeah, the stories are true. I'm your sister and your mother. And when Vanessa says to her, what did I do wrong? Why didn't your family want me? It is very compelling as she's asking those questions. And Grace just tells her flat out, they were afraid. They thought that, you would bring misfortune and that we would die. And I also, that part that she took her wrapped in her mother's cloth. You look back to what do you have to remember your past by? What do you have what kind of memories? No photographs or anything like that. Eventually in the interview, Vanessa will say, Grace, I'll never be able to thank you what you did for me. And Grace's words, I actually have this one right here on the screen there, the subtitle. God bless me the day I found you, and he's provided for us ever since. You don't have to ever thank me for what happened. It's a short story and it can be it is a super inspiring story, but this story represents choice after choice after choice that Grace made. Grace consistently kept doing the next right thing, from a 13-year-old girl to a 14-year-old with a baby. Other kids could have been playing and other stuff like that. This, sometimes we'd be all excited, the novelty, but that could get old, huh? When you don't have disposable diapers, you're struggling for enough food, you're not, formula, all of those things that Grace had to do. Her story just touches me so deeply because Grace just kept doing the next right thing, right into adulthood. And at the end of the clip, you would have seen Vanessa talking about she's in school, she's doing well in school, and I want to do something to help people, she says. I want to do something about justice. Maybe a judge or maybe a doctor. And I think to myself, yeah, Grace, Vanessa, you are doing that. There are so many people in Rwanda in this rebuilding, these 26 years now after the genocide, that were moved by the horrors of the genocide but not destroyed. I was there this summer with a group of businessmen, and we were traveling around the city with a real estate agent, really sharp young lady. Women play a massive role in Rwanda's rebuilding. The government said right at the beginning, after the genocide, they wrote a new constitution, and I wish this was in our constitution. They said 30% of all decision-making bodies in this country will be minimum 30% women, 30% of governors, 30% of prison wardens, 30%. The government has that policy. And in the parliament, it's not 30% though. Well, yeah, there's 30% that only women can occupy of the seats, but the other 70%, women now have half of that. Rwanda by far outstrips any other government with women in government. And as this young lady, super sharp real estate agent, was taking us around, we got talking and learning a bit about her family, and she had lost much of her family. And her sister had married a guy who went on to be a doctor. And he's one of just a handful of neurosurgeons in the country today. And he tracks back to being a boy like Grace, who saw all of the head wounds, who physically saw the brains exposed. And something like that, I think, could destroy somebody. Or in this man's case, it has been his driving force to serve people. And, a lot of people, he could go out and get a job as a neurosurgeon, a bunch of other places in the world, but he's chosen to stay in Rwanda. So what I wanted to, and I'm making this one a bit shorter here tonight because I really want time for us to dig into some questions, and I want to hear from you. Last night, at the end, I was really excited for the questions, but I was saying to myself, okay, I should have been shorter so that we can have some more conversation time, because I got a bunch more stories, and we definitely will get into more stories, because I believe in answering the questions, and anytime you want to get something home, like this idea of reframing, you got to wrap it in a story, the power of stories. And one other tool I want to share with you besides this tool of reframing, which we'll unpack just a little more in a minute, is this one that I've kind of just put a question in this big circle: who's in the center? There's no question that Grace put Vanessa in the center and had to continually put Vanessa and put others in the center. I don't blame Grace's family for telling her to leave the baby. I understand fear. I understand the desire to protect other members of your family and stuff. But Grace consistently not only did the right next thing, but she consistently moved out of the center and put others in the center of the circle. Last evening, we just briefly looked at this in our Q&A time about how neural pathways, and the more we fire those pathways, the more we literally rewire our brain. We can, the more we fire it, we talked about how the coating on the outside gets stronger, quicker, an electrically insulating layer wrapped around the axon, which increases the speed of electric conduction. And so think about the choices, this doing the right next thing, and then finding the good to reframe somebody. We're going to just look for a minute at a text. As I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about Grace and doing the next right thing and the ability to reframe, went back to that old memory verse. Man looks on the outward appearance. Look at this for a second, Samuel, is doing what God told him. He goes to Bethlehem, and the town fathers greet him there. And they're like apprehensive. Samuel, it must have been a bummer at times to be Samuel. And everybody, when you show up, they're like, uh-oh, what's going on? And Samuel's like, is something wrong? And they're like, no, nothing's wrong. I've come to sacrifice this heifer, which, I'm pausing there because we know what he's there for. He's looking to anoint the next king. But anyway, this heifer. So, and to lead you in worship of God. And so prepare yourselves, be consecrated, join me in worship. And he made sure Jesse and his sons were all consecrated and called to worship. And I'm not exactly sure how this next part plays out. If these sons, just out of respect, are coming to greet the prophet, what's going on there? But you guys know the story, okay? Each one that comes along, he looks at Eliab and he's like, whoa, this is the one, God's anointed. No, God says, looks aren't everything, Samuel. Don't be impressed with his looks and stature. I've already eliminated him. Okay. And God judges persons differently than people do, humans do. Men and women, we look at check them out. God looks into the heart. I reframed a photo for myself of Jesus this evening. I don't know if you can see Jesus in any of these men. Our internet at the house went out, but we're back on with the phone. That's good. The idea that Jesus saw people so different than everybody else. I just started listing in my mind, Zacchaeus, everybody hated him, but Jesus saw him different. The woman at the well, man, she's there, you know, at that in the middle of the day as opposed to morning and stuff like that. Jesus saw her different. Matthew, the tax collector, Jesus saw him different. You just go through the widow with the little mites, huh? The little mites. Okay, that sounds like bed bugs. But the widow who, you know, gave her mite, her tiny offering there. Jesus saw her different. He just saw everybody so different. And this ability to be able to see people different isn't just like something I can switch on one day and do that. There's no question in my mind that Grace had a habit already of compassion, of stepping outside the circle. And when she came to the big one, she was there, and she took that baby in her arms. And so I would love to explore with some of you a little deeper about you know, how people in Rwanda are coming back. You want to ask me, I'd be happy to talk to you too about the trauma. I think I heard Vanessa mention it a little bit as I came back on. I remember sitting in my office there at Milo. You know, the internet had finally come to the world and to Milo. And I one day Googled PTSD. And I started reading down through the list, and I was going, wow, check, 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 check. But that didn't mean I went and got help right away. In fact, it was quite a while. You know, there was this stigma about going and seeing a professional counselor. And there were mornings when Teresa and the kids would go. We lived across the river when we were at Milo. They had a parsonage on the other side of the river. There would be mornings when Teresa would go to work and the kids would go to school, and I'd say, hey, I'll come over a little later. And I'd go walking with my dogs. You guys, you know, you love it there at Milo in those forests. I go, well, walking with my dogs in those forests, and I'd just be sobbing. I remember the beginning of the Iraq War and seeing those people and, you know, their homes destroyed and stuff. And it was just tearing me up. I'd slump down against one of those big, beautiful trees, and I'd be sobbing. I mean, you know, little kid sobs, huh? Not like just little tears, but where you think you're not going to breathe again, you know, those kind of sobs. And the dog is licking the tears off my face. And finally, I went and got help, found a good counselor in Roseburg, and started learning tools and vocabulary and identifying thinking in my mind, subconscious thinking that I hadn't thought about before, but it was still impacting me, that was not true. And so that ability to get help, to start to identify, label these things, oh man, my big three for help with trauma, with PTSD and other forms. I just say trauma is often for many people, for most, at least for me, the way I've understood trauma is the sense of helplessness. When I feel helpless, that's when I feel more traumatized. And then it's just, it snowballs. But when I bring it into the open and I talk to somebody appropriately, you know, like a counselor and stuff, and we begin to address those issues bit by bit, one by one, counseling, journaling, and a great support group. That's what's been so central for me in the healing process with PTSD. So I'm gonna hand it back to you here, Melissa, and we're going to go into a little bit of conversation. I'm looking forward to some questions and some more conversation, and I'm sure a few more stories.
Absolutely, and we're really excited to be able to chat a little bit more with you and dive in a little deeper. So I'm actually going to toss it over to Ellie to bring us around with some dive deeper conversation for you, Pastor Carl.
Hi. So I didn't get any questions in the chat because everyone's too shy, but that's okay because I can make my own questions. We go along. So I was wondering, Carl, because I watched the movie I'm Not Leaving. It said that you were you were helping with ADRA. And I was wondering, what part did you help with? Like, what was your role when you were with ADRA?
There we go. Cool. I couldn't unmute myself. It was such a helpless feeling. No, thanks for that question, Ellie. With ADRA, we were basically building schools and operating clinics. And then 6 months after we got there in 1990, in the fall of 1990, a war started. And this war would go on for 3 years. And of course, ADRA's work then shifted we still in parts of the country were building our schools and operating the clinics, but we started working in these camps, displaced camps. You don't call it a refugee camp if they don't cross the border. So we call it IDP, a little bit of development tech language, huh? Internally displaced persons, IDP camps. And that's a lot of what ADRA was doing during that time up to the genocide. Good question. Thanks for that, Ellie. Thanks for just jumping right in here. And I know there were questions too from last evening, and I think people are probably pulling themselves together here a bit. So I don't mind pausing a little quiet time while we see another one come up. Nope, I just saw one come up.
Yeah, there's other ones right there.
Benjamin, how long did it take for you to come to the decision to stay behind? Good question. The war that started 3 years earlier brought us to a point almost of evacuation back in 1990. So this idea of evacuating wasn't a brand new idea. We had already thought about that even before in when the war had started there before. And then before the plane was shot down, those of you who know the story a little bit better, before the plane was shot down, we were having meetings at the embassy because there was a lot of unrest. There was also demonstrations, rioting, and the killing of people. And so we had considered what evacuation would look like. And we actually had a meeting about 2 weeks with American Adventist missionaries before the genocide actually happened, saying things are getting really tense here. Feels like we're sitting on a keg of dynamite. And we put in place evacuation plans. And I remember saying at that meeting, because I was the one going to the embassy and bringing back the reports from the embassy, I was kind of chairing that little meeting. And I remember saying, you know, folks, there's no cowards and there's no heroes. We are all going to have to decide what we think is the best thing to do. But then when the genocide started, it was so horrific. The gunfire, the killing was happening in every corner of the country and seemed like every corner of the city. And so that's when, you know, the embassy said, we're all leaving, everybody. You know, sometimes embassies will go down and I hate this term, they call it non-essential staff, you know, spouses and children. And I mean, like, are you kidding me? They're all essential. But anyway, they would send some people home and then a core group would stay. But this time, no, not even the ambassador. So what I'm just saying is there was a sense of thinking through it before. The plane is shot down Wednesday night. Thursday, the American embassy says, no evacuation. We're going to stay just a couple of days. We believe the rebel soldiers will take over the city. It'll be too dangerous to evacuate. That's Thursday. Friday, the embassy says, nope, we're all leaving. Saturday will be the first convoy. Sunday will be the last convoy. Everybody leaving, no decision. But of course, I did realize I did have a decision. And as I mentioned last night, you know, going in the bedroom, talking with Teresa, we made that decision and we just really felt it was the right thing to do. So thanks for asking about that. Last night I did explain a bit about books I had read, people I had influenced, and even very much the role of my parents. Our home was open. I had another story I didn't tell last night about some twins who moved in with us when I was a little kid because dad had first died in a work accident and mom died of cancer. Our home was always an open place. That was a huge part, I would say, in the decision too. Thanks for your question.
I see a couple of other questions. Did your children suffer from any PTSD symptoms as well?
Oh, love it. Thanks, Shamara. I love it when people ask about the kids. And tonight I don't have a picture to pop on the screen because I'm down to one phone and one device here. But I would love to put that picture. They were 10, 7, and 5 at the time in 1994. And they were there for 4 days of the genocide. But I give my wife boatloads of credit for helping them to feel safe and secure. They had no nightmares afterwards. I was really worried that when they evacuated, they went to Burundi, the country to the south, and then they went to Kenya, about 1,000 miles away to the east. I was worrying that they would feel abandoned by their dad, or maybe they might feel like somebody else is more important than us. Those were really easy thoughts for me to think that they could think. But I give so much credit to my wife that they'd never given me, and I've talked to them about it afterwards, never gave that impression. I think because my wife had this, both my wife and I, we both had this sense of family connection with Rwanda, that the kids sensed that sense of family too. And they didn't, start thinking about, well, us and them, what about us and what about them? But it was really a family mentality. And Teresa just did a marvelous job with that. Sometimes people ask, are they out doing ADRA or stuff like that? And they haven't chosen ADRA. They all three, some of you know them, so you know the answer to this. They all three have worked outside of America at different times. China, down in the South Pacific. I remember Mindy during college volunteering back in Tennessee. I'm super proud of them, and I'm super proud of the pathway that they're taking right now. But I do, like I said, I give so much credit to Teresa for helping them to feel safe and secure. Thanks for asking about that.
We have another question. If Grace's decision to take care of Vanessa endangered her family, could you talk a little bit about how she was able to find balance in taking care of the baby and taking care of her family?
That's an excellent, excellent question. And unfortunately, I can't talk specifically because I don't know that part of Grace's story. I can talk generally in terms of the culture in Rwanda. That might help a little bit, because behind that question, I can hear the question of our challenges of balancing so many things that we often have on our plate. And especially some of you students who have gotten really deeply involved in activism and how it can compete at times for so many other things. We got our parents saying, yeah, we got to do our homework. And we believe there's other things here we need to do as well. Two things that I think of that I know, one from Rwanda. Rwanda has a really big sense of community. When our kids would go out and run around and play around the neighborhood, we knew that there were adults watching them everywhere, and adults who were willing to step up and look after them like their own kids. So I'm sure that was part of the story for Vanessa, was the community joining in, the extended family joining in. Never perfect, never the same for anybody, but that's definitely something I saw a lot of in Rwanda. And I love that when I see that here in America and crisis comes, the fires and things that have just been going on. And we had a little town south of Spokane here, 80% of it burned. And the way that neighbors and people came together, which is often super heartwarming at the time of the crisis. But boy, when these things go on for months and then years, like in this case, raising a child, I'm sure that there were other people who were there to help her. But that doesn't mean also that she probably didn't have times where she felt alone. The other thing I would put into that question for here, when we get involved in projects and activism, whether students or adults, I've been involved for 16 years in what I would call the fight against genocide, an activist against genocide. And those of us specifically in the anti-genocide community, we talk about building an anti-genocide constituency. That's raising awareness and helping people understand what happened in Rwanda didn't have to happen. It could have been prevented. And so if we build, we believe, a large enough constituency that we can make a difference in these crises around the world. But that's a high burnout career path, you might say. And for me personally, one of the ways that I have found to avoid burnout is we often are overwhelmed with the horrors that are happening around the world. And at times it's easy to feel, I've got to read up on that, and I've got to watch this news broadcast, and I've got to go to that event, and those kind of things. And it's easy to find ourselves really firing a lot of pathways in our brain of anger and bitterness about all of the injustice and all of the wrong and all of the pain in the world. And it's not that those pathways should not be fired, but I would say that if those pathways are being fired more than the pathways of finding the good, of beautiful stuff in the world, if we hate harm and evil more than we love beauty and good, we're on a track to burnout, to just would like, did I get muted again? Okay, we're back again. You hear me? Ellie, give me a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
You were just muted for a second there.
Perfect. And so if we, it's one thing to say, okay, I want to love beauty more than I hate evil, but how do I go about doing that? And for me, one of the ways is, as I talked last night, journaling and putting those pictures, and pictures you guys send to me, that will be beauty, that will be good, that you will be sending into my life. So I intentionally go after the good, because the brain people, you know what they tell us? That negative stuff sticks like Velcro, eh? And positive stuff slides off like Teflon. And so we've got to be super intentional about the positive in this world and in our lives. And even taking time. I bet you've done like me a bunch of times. People say, hey, good job, nice work. Thanks for doing that. And my first reaction is to say, no big deal, some sort of self-deprecating, some sort of deflecting thing. Instead of saying, thank you. I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed working with, the Big Lake team on that one. Instead, just that little, the brain people tell us, just those little 10 seconds, 20 seconds of saying thank you and not deflecting or putting ourselves down builds those positive pathways in our brain. And I love that idea, that I can actually impact the construction of pathways in my brain. I go through perhaps a somewhat negative experience at TSA. I won't go into the details for you, but then I remember thinking as I left the TSA to go board my plane, am I gonna tell that story to the guy I sit down next to on the plane? Am I gonna, because I always call my wife before I take off, am I gonna tell my wife, hey, you wouldn't believe what just happened in TSA? Because if I do, it will strengthen those negative pathways. Now that's not to say we shouldn't process some stuff, but a little thing of a little hassle in TSA, I can let go of that. I got in a subway in New York, and then I'll stop with this one and another question. But I got in a subway in New York, jam-packed, and I'm on my way to the airport. I got my little carry-on. I mean, I'm packed in there. We're packed. And a guy comes and just squeezes in before the doors close, and we're all just packed even tighter. And he's right next to me. I mean, we're face-to-face kind of. Well, he's right next to me. It's like his ear is in my face. And he goes, ow! And he starts looking around the subway car, and he looks at the guy behind him, and he looks at me, and he says, he kicked me. And I'm kind of, I'm sardined there, and I'm looking at the guy who supposedly kicked him, and I'm looking at the guy who got kicked. And then the guy who got kicked, he says it again. He kicked me. And everybody's silent in the subway car, And then this gentleman, this black gentleman who was kicked, he said, gotta let it go. He's processing out loud. I love it. Just gotta let it go, and that, I love that story. That's just a great example. He was not hanging on to that negative, and he was firing the positive.
That's a really amazing response, in my opinion. That kind of made me chuckle a little.
Good.
Another question we got was, I'm assuming that God gave you hope during the genocide. Do you have any advice for us to have hope in the times we live in now?
Whoa,
How have you
love
found
it.
happiness during
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Thanks. We all know that panic is contagious. Fear is contagious. We know that. But have you ever thought how contagious courage is? Hey? I love this podcast, This American Life. And they had a broadcast, I think it's just maybe 2 weeks ago. And they were talking about movies that people only saw part way through. And they were talking about some that were kind of bad movies, but had amazing messages. And this one bad, not really good acting, I guess, and stuff movie back in maybe the 60s was a pandemic. And it was started in New York City by a ship that came in, and a macaw bird or some sort of exotic bird got out, flew around the city, and was infecting people. And here's the crazy thing about this movie. I don't know if any of you have heard about it. I'd love to see it, no matter how bad the acting is, that when people got infected, they got really nice. And there started to be so much kindness in New York City and all of this courtesy and stuff. And you might like, oh yeah, corny movie, but no, because a lot of the people, okay, in this movie, they said the alcohol and tobacco industry was really upset because everybody was so happy and their sales were going down, and they got to do something about it, and they had to come up with a vaccination. And I won't get into more details except to say that when they came up with a vaccination, a bunch of people didn't seem to be cured. They were still positive and optimistic. And they realized those people were not infected by the virus. Those people were infected by the kindness of the people with the virus. And that whole idea, I love that image. For me, courage and hope, there's no question that it comes from God, but I get frustrated at times if we just leave it there. Because I often want to know how, okay? How does God do that? How does God protect, huh? God protects because I saw people get killed, people who loved God and called out on God's name, and they got brutally murdered. And so you're like, And actually, tomorrow morning, we're going to talk a little more about that, but we can get into it tonight too if somebody asks the question and you want to, because there's plenty to talk about God's omnipotent power and love and genocide. But in the midst of all of that horror, I got hope from God through my wife. I got hope from God through pathways that have been established in my mind, childhood stories. Even I was able to talk to my wife every day on like a shortwave radio, which was a huge gift during the genocide. Every day, a fresh input. Inoculation, what is it? Yeah, a fresh input of hope and of courage. There were more stories like that story I shared with you about Grace. If you see that film, I'm Not Leaving, you'll see many different people. There's a favorite story, and some of you might have actually read it in your Bible book. I forget, we got Adventist students here in school. I think it was 5th grade. Joy Vaverka was working with a team of people and writing new Bible curriculum. And she says, Carl, I want a story. And this story of kids helping me clean barrels while snipers were shooting at us. Okay, I could go home and say, that was horrible. And yeah, it was horrible. But I could also focus, those kids were amazing. I was ready to get out when the first shots were fired. But the oldest kid's like, no, we come here all the time. It's going to be okay. Just wait. It'll stop. and I just hope can be found in so many different places, so many different people that's there. And without a doubt, every night, Teresa and I made a promise before we said goodbye. And by the way, when we said goodbye, we thought 2 weeks maximum. This thing won't last more than 2 weeks. But we made a promise that every night we would read Psalm 34. And the electricity went off after just a couple of days of genocide, and there was no more electricity. So I had a candle at nighttime. In Rwanda, the sun goes down at 6, comes up at 6. So you basically have 12 hours light, 12 hours dark, because it gets dark fast where the sun right by the equator drops straight down. And so some nights I would blow out the candle and I go, oh, wait a minute. And I remembered I hadn't read Psalm 34. And I get my match, strike the match, light the candle, get my Bible. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise will continually be on my lips. You go deeper into that one. the angel of the Lord encamps around about those who fear him and delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. And and you go deeper in that chapter, and it says those who love God, he like not a bone will be broken. And I'm like, uh-oh, we got a problem here, Houston, because there's people all around getting worse than broken bones, people who love God. And then my thinking was drawn deeper into, wait a minute, maybe he's not talking physical bones there. Maybe he's talking spiritual bones. And another voice in my head is like, oh no, that's a cop-out. You're just looking for an excuse. And I'm like, no. When you go deeper and you realize that there is something more than physical bones, there's something more than the physical thing we're going through right now here in COVID. That there's this great one, Corinthians. Is it 2 Corinthians 4? Somebody can probably find it and chat it for me. But it's this one that says we might be battered, but we're not broken. We might be knocked down, but we're not finished. This what's going on is small potatoes in comparison. Okay, I'm mixing a little bit of RSV and message, okay? But this is small potatoes in comparison to the glories that are coming ahead for us. And so I don't like to start off with that idea, oh, COVID is small potatoes, I was in a genocide. Absolutely not. Because everything that we go through is very real. And the separation we experience is I was so happy, Les, when I heard you say the other evening about physical distancing. You do that on purpose. Because I'm like, it's not social distancing. No, that's like we're shooting ourselves in the foot. Those are pathways we fire in our brain. But this separation that's happening, this is tough. This people who can't pay their rent, people who are getting evicted, and we keep going down through the line, people who lost grandpa and couldn't even go say goodbye, grandma, and couldn't get in. These babies who are being born and mom is there with, thank goodness, the hospital people, but nobody else. There are a lot of hardships that we're facing right now. But the idea that hope is contagious and we look for the good. And it's not like hope is like nuclear, okay? It's like you just need a little molecule of hope and life starts to flow back inside of you. And that's awesome for me. And that's why the stories, whether the stories from the Bible, whether it's stories from other people, that book I was talking to you about last night, Educated, there's just so many places that we can find hope. And so when somebody is really struggling, we don't need somebody coming around and saying, look at the bright side. You kind of feel like smacking them. But often what we need is somebody just to be quiet and to sit with us and to be present. That's why, if you remember in my prayer journal yesterday, when I was going through that little garden, that one section that just says, be present, breathe with me, believe with me. Those are to me, that's nuclear. That's super powerful.
Carl, that is so good. So good. Wow. I was just thinking 2 days ago, I was sitting with a guy that was an evacuee from the fires, and I was asking him a story, and he was saying, he's like, I've been a SWAT team member in the military, I've been a cop, and he was just telling this whole story of, for 2 hours, he told me his story. And I said, why did you leave? He said, because I watched a movie called Hacksaw Ridge. And he said, I realized that the bravery that he showed in standing up for people in the midst of it all was what I wanted to be. And he said, I always thought, people that didn't carry weapons, they were wimps or whatever. But when I saw what Desmond Doss did, he said, I want to be that person. And I want to stand up for people and fight for them. And I'm not putting a critique on the other life, because I did it. It's what it is. Yeah. But from now on, that's contagious. And just as you said that, I was like, just wrecked his life.
He's infected
and just opened up a whole new portal.
Yeah. He's infected millions of people. When I was a little kid, I read that book, Unlikeliest Hero, and that's like 50 years ago. And then to see the movie, sorry, that's not a joke, Les, okay? And so that's not,
Carl, you're only
And so-
like 40, so it's fine.
yeah, don't I wish. And so, so that idea when the movie came out and that Hacksaw Ridge, I was like, yes, yeah, people see that power that's possible, and that infects us. And so, yeah, thanks for that. You know, there was one other question, and I know we're coming down here on the timeline too, so you keep me here to that. But I saw a question there that somebody said, "Did you blame God?" And like I said, I'm going to talk more about God and genocide tomorrow, but no, never. I blamed myself, and some of that wasn't healthy, and some of that was necessary self-reflection, because it was easy for me to I blamed the American government, I blamed the United Nations, I definitely blamed the people who were swinging the machetes and that. But here's what it's not totally boiled down. I almost said it's boiled down to. It's still boiling down, okay? Because this is still a journey that I'm unpacking. But there is this God, in the most wild, unimaginable way, he values free choice. And I'm like, okay, God, free choice, but wait a minute. We're talking babies, and we're talking grandmas, and we're talking, innocent people, and okay, babies and grandmas don't get all the mercy and grace either. All of us need it. We're talking your children. And this idea that I expect God to draw the line is flawed as far as I'm concerned. God has empowered me to draw the line. He says, and I do believe in amazing, no explanation miracles, that people can say, wow, that is God. That is just no other explanation. But honestly, I don't think that's how God, at least I know God's doing a bunch of stuff and I'm not seeing it, okay? So obviously I can't speak to all of that stuff I can't see. But what I see is God working through people so much more than the unexplained miracle. And I'm not minimizing, okay? Don't get me wrong, not minimizing that at all. But the fact that when I shift, talk about reframing the situation from expecting God to draw the line to recognizing I can draw the line. Those neighbor ladies who stood in front of our house and stopped the killers, the men, okay, that's another thing. And I don't want to call them killers anymore, because that's firing pathways in my brain that is really on a pathway to harm. We'll get into a pathway to harm and a pathway to healing tomorrow. But so people who killed, those ladies who stood in front of our gate and stopped the people who were killing from coming in, they drew the line. That man Damas, if you get into the story there at the orphanage with 80 kids and it's over 400 kids, he drew the line. The nurse Trifine, who was in there taking care of these kids' runny noses and runny bottoms and bandaging the men who were doing the murdering, she was drawing another type of a line. This drawing a line with love is one of the most, it is the most powerful force. It is so easy to look at all the horrible stuff that's happening and think that horrible stuff, that fear is somehow more powerful than love. Maybe in volume, we see fear in volume greater than love, but not in power, because we see a little bit of love that can drive back enormous fear. And so, no, I didn't blame God. I got angry about different things and angry at God at times too. And God is so cool. He's like, yeah, go ahead. Let's talk about it. Come on. I want to explore that with you. I don't want to hide nothing. I want to talk about everything with you. And that attitude that I'm not going to throw away what I believe, because I hung on to that little song from when I was a little kid. I hung on to that always. Jesus loves me. I don't care what you say. Jesus loves those people who died. I know, but I haven't figured out yet why they had to die. I haven't figured out yet why somebody didn't intervene and stop them. But I'm not going to throw out what I know for all of these unknowns, these questions that I don't know. And that has that has been good. That has really helped me. And even the times when you get really, really low, you go, I got five foundational things that maybe some of you have actually heard me talk about before about God when I get really, really low. Number one, God's always with me, always. Number two, this one was a hard one. God takes great delight in me. Now, sometimes I soften that and I say he takes great delight in our relationship, because it's really a tough one when you really embrace that God takes delight in you, in me, not because of what I do or don't do, but because I'm his child. Number three, God's love calms my heart, often music. Some mornings I'll wake up and they're tough and I'll start a song. I'll go to YouTube, I'll go to Amazon Music, and I'll start a song. Last night we were talking about, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And this morning wasn't a hard time, but I was thinking about that this morning. I went and found this song on YouTube. These kids, if you look at my father's, go to prepare a place for you. Anyway, I'll find the link and share it later, maybe on our Instagram. I'm just finally getting this Instagram page going a little more, but often music. Number three, God's love calms my heart. Number four, God has everything I need for every situation. Together, we're going to make it. And man, by the time I get to number five, Jesus is my redeemer. He's my shepherd. I love that shepherd one. Things have changed. I am seeing things different. Situations are reframed from those five core beliefs that I hold, and where they came from, and some of that stuff, maybe we'll get into that more tomorrow too. We'll see.
That is so good. Thank you so much, Carl. And let's just do this. We're going to do a formal close here. And then for those of you who'd like to stick around, we'll have kind of like bonus round, water cooler time afterwards. But I know some of you have traveled to where you're meeting and all the rest, and we want to just honor that. Thank you for what you said. And I'm haunted by a quote I read years ago, and I think a book called Blue Like Jazz. It was a Portland author, Donald Miller, and he said something like, thinking about how could people do genocidal things, or how could Hitler do what he did. And I think it's the Beat poet he's talking to in there, and he said, we're all one step away from being Hitler. And just the idea that, like, oh, that's true. It's not like he just fostered a pathway that went that direction, and we can all do the same thing very easily. And the temptation is that, but we can also choose a different path. And I hear that throughout your message tonight, Carl, just that idea of the choice that's so powerful, and that, like, yeah, you're right. It's contagious one way, but it's also contagious the other way. Be that.
Yeah.
And that beacon of light. I mean, it's the one light bulb out in the storm, which pierces the storm, and it's just one bulb, but it shines so bright. And I guess that's why the metaphor is be salt, be light. It's for that. So thank you so much, Carl.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Looking forward to more conversations. And yeah, if people want to hang out a little bit afterwards, that'll be cool.
Awesome. What we'll do is
I was just going to say, before we jump in and try to do a little bit more worship and music, Pastor Carl, what would you say that we can do right here and right now to make God's message on your heart applicable?
Love that. Thank you. Thank you very much, Melissa. Okay, I'm a writer, okay? And I wasn't before, and I'm not like a professional writer. Okay, I did do one book, but I love when I write, it gives me clarity. It's like cleaning the windshield. I get clarity and I can focus. And one of the things that's really been valuable for me are, those five that I just outlined for you. I would ask you what your five are, or your three, or your two, or your seven. What are those things that you believe about God without anything? And if there's not anything right now, that's okay too. Write it down, because it's that kind of honest evaluation that I think is so necessary on the journey that we're on. And I don't I don't take offense or try to convince somebody of anything like that. You know, if they're saying, no, I don't have one thing about God. That's their journey and that's where they are right now. And I respect that, but I love to have conversations. And so that kind of looking inside ourselves and asking ourselves, what aren't just, you know, what I believe about God, but especially if you don't, you know, believe, I mean, I get lots of conversations with students who don't believe God. And when we have great conversations, because we start talking about values and what are your core values. And some of you saw at the beginning this evening on the screen there behind me, this little educational nonprofit that my wife and I started, World Outside My Shoes. Those three core values of respect, empathy, and inclusion are three very important values to me and to our community. So if you stop and if you're wondering, what are some core values? We touched last night really briefly there in Galatians 5, what we often call fruits of the Spirit. I think those, you know, sometimes you think fruit, oh, that's really nice. No, this is more than just really nice fruit. This is core, powerful stuff. And you could start looking at those values and say, which of these are most important to me? So I'm really appreciative of that question, Melissa, because often we got to get out and do good stuff. And yes, we do. You know, when you're out, pick up trash. You know, that's a simple little thing you can do. Thank people. Start firing those gratitude pathways. But before we run into action and doing, I really invite us to be quiet, be with what we believe is really important, our values, write them down, maybe do a little artwork around them, maybe take some photos that illustrate them, and then start to talk to the people closest to you about those core values and about what you really is important to believe, because we often wait until somebody's about to die or some crisis or things like that to have these meaningful conversations. So that would have been the short answer. The short answer would have been self-reflection, core values, and meaningful conversations with people close to us. And Sabbath gives us a great opportunity for those of us who are Sabbath keepers, gives us a great opportunity to do that.
Carl, keep us going here. I'm just thinking, looking at the chat here, are there some questions we didn't get to? And I'll pull that back up. Let me start with this question. Carl, as you look at where we are right now in our world, what are the things that we need to look at? Let me ask you this way. How were people compelled to do the horrible things that they did? Carl, I lost you. Are you still there?
Nice.
There
Thank
we go.
you. You lifted, you let me unmute myself again. You set me free. Thanks, Les.
Nice.
Yeah. You know, it's I was just gonna, I don't think we'll see if we need any pictures or anything later there. But this process, you know, as I began to just sort of try to unpack a little bit last night, how somebody goes from a kind, generous person to murdering people. How does that happen? And that's not a natural process, I would say. I mean, well, I won't get into the philosophy of it, but let's just look at a few practical examples of what happened in Rwanda and what I think is applicable everywhere, okay? The story last night with Gasikwa and the men who came to kill the people in his house. We had 3 men in that picture, that drawing that was there. 2 men who were there with clubs ready to kill. 1 man who's there with 2 chickens in his hand, showing grace and mercy. All 3 of them had listened to what was called Radio Milkaline in Rwanda during the genocide. This radio was broadcasting messages out to the people through 3 different platforms. Comedians, a great way to communicate to people, but the comedians' messages were always against the Tutsi people. Musicians, super powerful way to communicate, but their lyrics against it, and then flat out hate speech. And I often compare it to like messages. I don't think I hope I'm not repeating myself from last night, because sometimes when I talk to so many school groups, I'm like, who did I tell this to, which one? But the idea that the messages can come through, I used to say they come through like the radio waves, like a brick. Okay, imagine a brick, metaphorical brick, radio waves comes in with this message. You catch the brick, and on the brick is this message against the Tutsi people. It's just like when we're seeing something on the internet, or we're listening to we hear negative messages about different people. What do we do with that negative message? In the case of the two men with clubs and machetes, they built a metaphorical wall between them and their neighbor from this information. And when I say metaphorical wall between them, it's easy to say we dehumanize, but for me, it's a lot. I'm a visual learner. And when I say, well, what do you mean we dehumanize? We begin to only see people as one thing. And that one thing, we love simple, singular solutions. Oh, we're going to take care of the, problem somewhere. We'll build a wall. We think that there's a simple, singular solution to very complex issues. And in Rwanda, as the people bought into there was a war going on, and they said Tutsis, many Tutsi people had fled the country at independence in the 60s because of violence. Tried to come home 10, 20, 30 years, not allowed home. Finally, they picked up guns and they said, we're coming home with guns. And so there was a war. So that then gave a platform for the extremists in Rwanda to say, all Tutsis are bad. These guys who are attacking us are bad. But there were people like Gasikwa who said, no, when those bricks came flying towards him, they go, no, this is not true. And they wouldn't buy that. He wouldn't fire those pathways in his brain. And he kept firing the pathways of compassion, respect, empathy, and inclusion. So I love this. See if this is too exaggerated. But I love the idea of Gasikwa with a couple of chickens busting through that metaphorical wall with kindness. And all of a sudden, these men with clubs and machetes, they don't see a wall that's just singular, the enemy. They see a human again. They see their neighbors. And that act of kindness that he did busted through that perception of that we have in America against immigrants at times, or that perception that people have against Muslims or against Democrats, against Republicans. All of this idea of us and them often gets singled down to one singular thing, and we see people singularly. And when we see people singularly, unfortunately, we can do some really horrible things. And fortunately, there are people like Gasikwa, and there's many people like we've seen here in America's history who have stood up and said, no, that is singularly wrong. And I will always, one of my core values is everybody is equal. One of my core values is everybody is relational. Everybody is valuable. And so coming back to the core values, it's really hard when they're selling their bricks through the air and those bricks run into core values. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute. No, that doesn't stand up when I look at these core values. When I look at, for me as a Christian, that when it's coming election time, and I'm getting down to the dirty stuff here now, when it's coming election time, I'm going to look at number one. Jesus said, number one, love God with all your heart. You know how you can do that? Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor like I love him. So I'm going to be looking at propositions and candidates who are going to put my neighbor in a better position than they are today. I'm going to be looking at that idea of putting others first is a core value for me. And so that to me are guards or vaccinations against the poison that comes in from people trying to define somebody as the enemy. I don't think when Jesus said love your enemy, he meant to just, well, yeah, they'll always be your enemy, but just love them. But I think when he said love your enemy, all of a sudden you start doing acts of love. The choice to love is a choice to connect. And that enemy label and facade and veneer starts to fade away. And we see somebody in the image of God.
Pastor Carl, what is something you wish people would ask about or that you'd want to share more, but a lot of people don't bring up?
I don't know. People have a lot of really good questions. And I think about those things. I mean, the things that I get the most excited about are our potential to rebuild, to restore, to reconnect things. We have an enormous potential to destroy. But I get excited when we start talking about how do we put the pieces back together. And that's kind of what I've saved for last tomorrow, but not like it's any spoiler or anything. But to start, I'd love to start talking about what does a restorative mindset look like as opposed to a punitive mindset. There's a lot of times when injustice happens, and my first response is, who did it? And somebody's got to pay. And when those are my first responses, that's very natural and very normal. And often that's not a bad question to find out who did it, because we need to be safe, and we need to grow, and we need to have an environment where people can flourish. So it's not a bad question to ask who did it. The question is, why do I want to know who did it? Do I want to know who did it so that we can restore that person and the harm that was done? Or do I want to know who did it so we can punish and we can isolate? And that mentality of punishing and isolating, it does have a place at certain times in life, because we need to be safe, and people don't change overnight. But I do believe that people can change. And so what is going to be the habitat that's most conducive to people finding safety, value, that they are of value? Because often we know people who harm have been deeply harmed. That doesn't excuse them for harming, but we know there's direct connections and relationships between that. People who very hard, I think it was a question last night, about people who, it was about love, and how, I think that was with our group here. I had this gate whack me in the head today and knock me flat. I am so happy I'm here talking with you guys tonight. So anything I'm forgetting, I'm blaming on that blow to the head earlier today. But the idea that that love really is not about punishment. Love is about restoring. Love is about healing. And so to be able to have these conversations, I used to think restorative justice was just a phrase for the judicial system. And as I've gone deeper into it, I realized, no, that's a phrase for marriage. That's a phrase for our family, our home. That's a business practice. That's a mentality that says harm was done. We need to hear everybody's voice to find out what actually all the harm was that happened, the contributing factors, and then how can we repair that harm? And of course, how can we put in place measures so that that harm is less likely to happen again? So it really, some people think that restorative is soft on harm or people who've done wrong. And I would say no, consequences are very much a part of restorative practices, but they're all with this mentality of bringing healing and restoration. And all of this can sound really like good theory and nice pie in the sky, but when it comes down to somebody who has done harm to people you love, to your children, to your family and stuff, that's when I think Rwanda says, no, this is not pie in the sky. We can give you, and we are, our lives. For many of the people, many people in Rwanda are still angry and bitter. That's understand. It's a spectrum, like anywhere in the world. But there's many examples in Rwanda of people who have said, no, somebody's got to pay is not the way forward to break the cycle. And often we're like, I don't want to invest all the time in this. But then we look at our kids and we go, for my kids, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to break the cycle. We're going to do this hard, often messy work of restorative justice. So once again, that probably would have been the short answer to your question, to talk more about restorative practices, restorative mindsets, that stuff that I'm really excited. But we do have to talk about the other to really understand and appreciate, the harm. When you have somebody in your family like we do, who's a police officer, I adore my son-in-law. He's like a father's dream for his daughter. And we have other in our family who have been out there on the front lines with the demonstrations. And I adore them too. And I see all kinds of perspectives in this. But can we get together and talk about our shared common core values? And then let's look at the problems, because really we all do have a lot in common in core values. And how can we start to find a way together instead of just shouting at each other? And a lot of that has to do with our willingness to listen. And that's tough. How we doing? Did we talk everybody into bed?
No, I have a question myself, actually.
Absolutely. Go
Yeah,
for it.
so I was just wondering, was there ever a moment when you were in Rwanda that you just felt like you could not go the next day? Like it was just rough and you had a hard moment and you just said, like, God, I can't go any further. Like, and then how did you get out of that?
I love that question. And I'm doing memory searches right now, because often I do focus on the good, and the more you fire certain pathways, the quicker they come back. But that doesn't mean that your question is really valuable. And some pathways are firing in my mind about hope and courage and people who inspired, and stuff in scripture. Man, here's one, and I'm not remembering the exact negative that threw me down into a real slump, but I remember getting out of it. And it was Desire of Ages, and it was the story of John the Baptist. And it was John the Baptist. Oh my goodness. If anybody could ever have felt abandoned, if they could have felt like God is here on earth. He is walking among us. He is the Word in flesh, and I'm rotting in prison. And the reason I mentioned Desire of Ages is because Mrs. White says that his story would be an inspiration for people throughout time. A couple thousand years later, this guy's in Rwanda in a genocide, struggling. And I turned to that story and I found courage and inspiration. I loved just post-genocide. This series came out about the book of Matthew, the Bible and the Living Bible. What did they call that, huh? Bruce Marciano was playing Jesus in that series. And we actually had him to a Bible camp once at Big Lake. I don't know if you remember that, Les. Yeah. Anyway, the reason I just mentioned that is there's the hard times right in the middle, like you asked for, Ellie. But often in the middle of it, we were really consumed with what can we do to help in this situation? Because I really believe that having a mission is a major vaccination against the paralysis of fear. Fear can really just shut you down. But when you have a mission and you see that mission, and we're busy with that mission. So throughout the genocide, often I would come back exhausted, man, after a day out there. I had this, where is that? Yeah. I just grabbed this out of the closet the other day. This is my old flak jacket from the genocide. It was a UN-issued flak jacket, and I sewed a little sticker on it that said ADRA. This thing, okay, it's not like a bulletproof vest, Flak jackets are just made for when you have like bombs and shrapnel and stuff that goes off. And these things will hopefully protect you from some shrapnel, basically. And then some of them have places where you put metal plates in it like this. When you spend all day in this thing in really hot weather, and you're out there and we're working, and it's not just this and hot weather and working, but it's trauma. Trauma can be incredibly exhausting. And I come back, my bed was in the hallway in the middle of the house. As many brick walls between me and the bullets outside as possible. I was asleep like a log. Almost as soon as my head hit the pillow there. And then the next morning you're up and you're at it again. And you're looking at strategies. You're looking for people who can be allies. This idea of finding allies among the enemy, powerful thing that we haven't gotten into, in this little time we've been together. But so I would say probably one of the things that guarded me from that deep point of depression and despair that you were asking about was having a mission and working in that mission. But there were those other moments. I remember another time. Now that you asked me, I'm starting to go there. I was so discouraged, and I had a car battery that I could hook up to our computer at the time. We had these old computers and a little search. Big old. This is 1994. Hey, and there's a Bible program that I could search, and I didn't search for hope or courage or strength. I was so bummed. I just searched for discourage. Yeah, discouraged. That was the word, because I just ran through the verse in my mind. Because when I put that in there, the verse that jumped up, I just searched discouraged. Joshua 1:9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And for some people, that might just be lines in a book, but not when you're in the middle of that kind of stuff. You're like a drowning man reaching for something that can save you. And I love that. That's why later on, when I went to Milo and we learned this song in like a minor key, it's the only time I ever did special music. I'm not like a big singer. I wonder how many people are still on here. Let me just do this one. This song is have I not commanded you be strong and courageous? Have I not commanded you be strong and courageous? Do not be terrified. Shoot, I'm going off key. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you may go. Hey, hey, hey. And we would sing that in rounds. And I love that, because of course that was tracking back to that time. Ali, thanks for that question. Great question.
Carl, I had a question for you too. Another
Benjamin,
question.
yeah. Benjamin, I let Ali off the hook. What is wrong with me? I'm slipping. Ali, what do you love doing? What do you love to do, Ali? If you get free time, I'm back to you, girl. You need to unmute yourself. Ali, are you frozen? If you don't move, you could fake like you're frozen, but you just smiled. So you can't fake like you're frozen. Ali, what do you love doing? Everybody I talk to, I have to find out.
Oh,
what
you're
they love
talking to
doing.
me.
Yes,
I thought you were talking to someone else. Oh.
Yeah, I was, and then I switched back, so it's not really fair. I'm coming
sorry.
to you, Benjamin. Benjamin, you think about what you love doing.
Okay. It's Ellie, but that's fine.
Oh, sorry, Ellie. That's why you're not answering. I'm calling you by the wrong name.
Exactly.
Ellie.
That's fine. I caught on though.
What do you love doing?
I love playing sports, reading, writing. I'm an extroverted person. I'm a very people person. I like going out and talking with people. So
nice. Do you write any poetry?
I do. I actually do. I don't share it with people because, well, I do share it with some people, but it's very specific people.
Well, maybe one day, if I could get on that some people list.
Yeah, I would share it with you, Carl. I feel like you can make that
right.
special people list.
Thank you. All right. Thanks. Ellie, right? Ellie. I don't know where I was going. All right. Benjamin, what do you love doing?
Okay, well, I like eating cinnamon rolls. That's just I'm a cinnamon roll person, and
Goodness,
I
nice.
like fitness stuff. I like working out,
That's
but
a good combination with the cinnamon rolls.
yes, yeah, a very very good combination.
All right.
But
What do you want to explore, man?
job, like job.
No, I say what question or what did you
Oh,
want to
okay.
explore?
So when my grandpa had cancer, I got like really mad and frustrated, and so I sort of blamed God, and so, but I got over that, and I realized that it wasn't God that I should be blaming, and so I just was wondering if you ever went through the stage that I kind of went through too.
Can you tell me how, you just kind of summarized, I think, a boatload of work that you must have done. How did you get over it?
Lots of time and lots of alone time, just lots of it.
Because I'm not a big believer, that time helps us get over anything alone. I think time combined with something. So that's interesting when you said alone time.
Okay, well, not alone time. I talk to people and God especially, but
Okay.
but yeah.
So you worked through it in conversation.
Yes. Like Ellie,
Because
I'm also an extroverted person. I like to talk a lot.
yeah,
I respect that.
me too. I think we're all guilty there, or not guilty. We're all happy there. But I think that what you just described is really the way to move through that. Because I have been angry about different things, but I've always had this core sense that no, God, just being angry isn't, anger is an emotion, and it's usually an emotion at injustice, which is really a good thing, because we should be angry at injustice. The problem is when it stays and we don't transition to that anger to something productive, to find a way to deal with that and to understand its causes. So I would say that is, let me give you an example, not so much God, but angry at the United Nations. And I was angry at the United Nations for like 21, until 2017. So that would have been 17 plus 6, 23 years. I was angry at the United Nations for 23 years for their failure and their culpability in the Rwandan genocide. And then I got an invitation by the Rwandan government to speak at the UN at a commemoration service. Super honored by that invitation, but really not wanting to go to the UN because of my anger. And I just felt like the place was, I don't know that I would have said the word evil, but I just felt like it was inefficient. It was a bureaucracy, and they had so many opportunities to save lives, thinking primarily about Rwanda. And that was my problem. I was single-mindedly thinking about one thing, the UN failure in Rwanda. Nothing about the UN fighting, polio, or the UN and women's rights, or the UN, gender equality, and UN and other initiatives, develop UNDP, UN work with refugees and different things, none of which is perfect, but there's some good stuff that they are doing. I was only defining it by that one thing. And having to come face to face with the UN that time really brought me to the point of saying, Carl, you're angry at them for one thing. You need to let go of that anger, because it's coloring everything else, not just the UN, but other things that are similar to the UN, state bodies and organizations, big organizations themselves. And so I feel like I've sort of avoided your question though, because I went off to the UN, and your question was really about God and how did I get out of that. And I would say journaling and talking to God about it, talking to people, I've still got some stuff that I'm working through. I remember a conversation, Alden Thompson, a lot of people know him, a theology guy at Walla Walla. And I remember talking to him about some of my really hard questions. And so I think that God, sometimes I'm just like, really, God? You know, you work through people, you know? But he's like, yep. That's my main MO. I work through people. And so wrestling with that bit about anger with God, talking to people that I trust about it, really, really important. But I really do appreciate when you said the alone time is important. Without alone time, I fool myself about a lot of things, and I can stay blind to different things without time to reflect. And when I say alone time, it's usually journaling with God. So it's not really alone, but it's just me and God. I hope that's a little bit useful, Benjamin.
That was. Thank you.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. Where are you from? Where are you? What school are you at?
I go to CAA, and I live down in Vancouver area, and
Cool.
I'm a sophomore.
Cool, Benjamin. Nice to meet you. Hope we'll
Thank
meet
you.
up one day, maybe face to face.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
How about we do this? Let's go with one more question. And is there one more on the docket that anybody has face to face? If not, we'll grab one more from chat and call it a night.
Am I supposed to be looking at the chat, or is somebody supposed to be speaking?
That's good. I thought, since people were jumping on, we were just going to jump on that way. And then as soon as I say the last one, then of course we all go quiet because it's that final jump. Let's pull up the chat real quick and look. I know there was several more on there.
It looks like there's one other question that was like a part 2 of one that didn't get answered before.
Oh, there we
and
go.
it's, how do you find happiness in hard times?
I've been reading this book with a group of teachers called Permission to Feel, and it's about emotional intelligence. Mark Brackett. If any of you are podcast nuts like me, you might want to check out. Brené Brown, you know her too, I'm sure, eh?
Yeah.
And Brené Brown, and she does a podcast with Mark Brackett, and he's the author of this book, Permission to Feel. And one of the things that we were reading recently is, as we begin to identify different emotions, he gives I'll try to do this short here. He has this great acronym called RULER, R-U-L-E-R, like a ruler, you measure a measuring stick, a ruler. R in RULER stands for recognize. We have to recognize the emotion. The U is understand it. The L is label it. The E is express it. And the R is regulate it. Okay? And so it's the difference, for example, between you think somebody's angry but really they're not angry, they're disappointed. And there's power in being able to identify specific emotions, because then we can begin to understand their causes. And so back to this question of happiness in hard times, one of the things that he was looking at in that chapter was the difference between joy and contentment. And I'm like, joy, contentment, that's all just good. Well, no, stop and understand. Joy often is something that comes sort of quick, a surprise, something is accomplished, somebody gives you a gift, things like that. You have joy. Contentment is more of an even state. Paul, he's the master at that. I learned to be content. Good times, bad times, with plenty, with nothing. And that ability to learn contentment, I think, is a key to happiness. Won't be all the time. I would put happiness, and maybe I need to write and understand these two a little better, but I put happiness and joy together, which are really important, but they're not necessarily a constant state like contentment can be. And so in this time, one of the things that helps me with contentment is finding meaning. And I find, like right now, we're working through and understanding that emotions are actually like a source of energy that can be harnessed and work for us. Emotions are like the light boards on the dash of your car. Without those, like, oh, that's fine, I'm driving fine, but your engine's burning up. So you need to know emotions become all of a sudden this great ally, this great friend. Don't leave home without it, instead of often the way they've been thought about in the past. So I won't go into that in depth, but finding purpose and meaning, understanding what's going on around us, and how together, every Tuesday night, I meet with a group of teachers. We've been doing it since March. It's been awesome. And any teachers who want to join, you're welcome. But that is a time, that's a place where I find meaning and I find purpose as we're digging into, I mentioned earlier, restorative justice, right now, emotional intelligence. So finding purpose would be another way that, to me, would lead towards contentment. The idea of, typically growing up with this idea of, well, God is the answer to everything. Yes, but once again, I'm asking how. What are the practical, what are the steps that are involved here in these types of things? And I'll just come back and end with my all-time favorite, finding the good. Finding the good is how I often recognize meaning, purpose, what's really going on here. Yes, this is happening on the surface, but down deeper, I see the commitment of our healthcare workers to risking their lives for other people in this time. And I see, wow, there's purpose, there's inspiration. And as I keep looking for the good, people are finding the good all over the place now with dogs. Hey, they're like getting pets like crazy in America, dogs. And they're finding, oh, that's unconditional love. Wow, we need more of that. And you find out, you wake up in the morning and somebody's wagging their tail and happy to see you and stuff. You just find the good all around you. And the more you find, the more you see it's there. And it's not, there's something about finding the good that's different. And I need to write about this because I hesitate sometimes. Well, I don't. I do it all the time. I talk about stuff I haven't written about, but I need to, and I will write more about this. The idea of finding the good does not become an insatiable appetite. I am satiated often. We talked about it last night in this word portion. When I say, Father, you are my portion. And I don't know if you guys have thought about this before. I live in a world with a lot of people who God is kind of a barrier and a word, a stumbling block. They've had a lot of negative things associated with that word. So that's why I often talk about good. But you know that good is God with an extra O in there. And that's not some cute little word trick. That is power. And so for other people, their source of good is not God. And I'm not arguing with them, but we all can be talking, we can be standing shoulder to shoulder, looking for the good. I believe the source is God. I believe that with all of my heart. They might believe in another source, but we can walk together looking for the good. And doing that, we can have a positive impact on our planet and not be, shouting at each other and having a negative impact on our planet.
Thank you, Pastor Carl. I'm excited.
Well, thank you for that.
Share a little bit more with you tomorrow at 10:30. In the meantime, would you mind, Pastor Carl, closing us out with prayer, our little afterglow here?
Absolutely. and we'll pray that you forgot my off-tune singing. But okay, don't be silly. Okay, I almost battery. No, I got 10%. Hey, thanks you guys really for sticking around. It's been nice just to chat. Father, we're not joking here, not being silly. We're just super grateful. Grateful that even when we are silly, you don't judge us. You love us. You just love us back. You love us back from all kinds of ways we turn. And I don't want to just say we, Lord, I want to say me, different directions I turn. You keep loving me back. And I am so grateful to you. I'm grateful for your love. I'm grateful for the peace and the contentment that we can have in our walk together with you. I'm grateful too for the challenges, the kind of kick in the pants that you give too at times. And I'm grateful that Oregon Conference Youth decided to go for this with this virtual Bible camp. It was easy to look at some of the negative things, people being zoomed out, Zoom fatigue and all that kind of stuff. But when we look at it that way, we really don't see you in the picture. When all of a sudden, we kind of clean the windshield and we look closely and we see you, we're like, yeah, let's do this. And so I thank you for the chance to clean the windshield a bit and to explore the way you love us through each other. Love that story, Lord, of Grace and Vanessa. And I love all the stories, whether it's John the Baptist, that hard story in the prison cell, or whether it's the beautiful story of little kids coming and sitting on your lap. There's just so many restorative stories. And we're thankful for the Sabbath, that we can dig deeper into them. We just, without any feeling like we got to be doing this, we got to be doing that, we lay all of that stuff aside and we just dig in deeper with you, and we love it and we thank you for it. And Father, I pray this evening, I don't know what's going on. It's really hard, with this distance and the virtual communication, but I pray for anyone who's been with us in this group that is struggling, feeling perhaps really alone or discouraged. We'd love to think about your power, especially in the form of the Holy Spirit, just blowing like a breeze, refreshing, blowing away the clouds. Might they be able to see the good and to relish that good, to see how you lavish stuff on us. And we don't expect that just to happen like the Holy Spirit mysteriously blowing breeze. We want to be part of that happening. So help us to be part of that breeze. Help us to be part of that finding the good. We're excited. We love you. Amen.
Thank you again. We'll see you guys tomorrow at 10:30. Happy Sabbath and have a good night's rest.